Nigeria's president signs the student loan bill into law. How exactly will it work? Good morning and welcome to Business Week. Over the next hour, I'll be highlighting some of the top business stories and events that made global headlines during the week with deep insights and analysis from my guests Mukta Mohammed and Uka AJ. I'm Rolake Akinkugbe Filani. Well, we're going to start with a look at energy commodities as at Friday, the 16th of June. Interesting that Brent crude has actually rallied, and I guess that's on the back of the OPEC supply cuts and news coming out of China that the government is going to pursue more aggressive demand policies to boost that economy. So I guess investors and future contracts are going up on the rally. We also see Western Texas Intermediate in the US rallying, as well as natural gas and gasoline. So global crude oil futures across board are rallying on the back of news coming out of China about strengthening demand and market expectations of strengthening demand over the next quarter or so. Let's look at what's happening in the Nigerian stock markets. It was a very, very interesting week actually on the NSE. Of course, Nigeria, there was a public holiday on Monday, the 12th of July. But what was really interesting that investors did appear to react positively to the news that the CBN governor had been suspended. And what we saw was a 15-year high on the all-share index of the Nigeria Stock Exchange, increasing in value by 1.2 trillion naira. And we also saw a 3.9% pop up on that market on June 13th. But as we'll see later, it wasn't only equity markets that reacted, but also the bond markets. So where did we end at the close of business on Friday? 59,000 was the value on the all-share index. 9,417 deals actually, 6.5 billion naira in value. That's about $9.8 million with a market capitalization of 32.12 trillion naira. Let's look at what's happening elsewhere around the world. So of course, for Europe, we had European equities all closed positive. Interestingly, the ECB actually raised interest rates by 25% basis points, but obviously that didn't spoil the party in Europe. Euro Stoxx 600, you can see there, closing at 466.93, up 56%. Also, we have the FTSE 100 all-share index in London, also up by 1.19%, and the DAX in Germany, up by 0.4% at 16,357. And of course, if you look at Spain and the Paris markets, and in fact, Paris is doing quite well at 1.34%. So ECB rate rises not significantly spoiling the party across European stock markets. Let's see what's happening on Wall Street as at Friday, the 16th of June. Yeah, so here are the Business Week top picks. The Nigerian president, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, has got off to a flying start at the speed of lightning. Well, I talked about equity markets at the top of the hour. It wasn't just equity markets that reacted, but 2051 bonds yields also rallied for Nigeria on the news on the back of the CBN governor suspension we saw there. I guess investors were also betting on the devaluation, and guess what? Right after the suspension, news came out. The special advisor, who's now special advisor on monetary policy to President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, Mr. Wale Edu, did say that the government would move ahead with a plan to unify exchange rates. And we did have a CBN circular issued to commercial banks, deposit money banks across the board, saying that it had removed the cap on the investor and exporters window, the I&E window. So for the first time in many years, Nigeria's currency was allowed to be determined by market forces. And actually, at the close of business yesterday, The I&E window, the Naira ended at around 663.04% to the dollar. So clearly we have an implied devaluation in there. And of course, other news coming out of Nigeria is headline inflation. The National Bureau of Statistics released figures showing that inflation rose in May to 22.41% from 22.22% in April. And of course, one of the huge drivers accounting for that has been the rise in energy prices, fuel prices, gas prices, petrol prices, feeding through to this important economic metric. This will be good news to oil and gas market watchers. Nigeria has regained its top spot in Africa ahead of Angola, Algeria, and Libya as the biggest producer. Production grew in May by 185,000 barrels a day to 1.18 million barrels a day. Good news out there for Nigeria, especially on the back of recent OPEC cuts announced some weeks ago. And of course, we saw this news emerge several days ago out of Nigeria that the special advisors have finally been appointed. So the president got approval to appoint 20 special advisors, and here are a few of the names, some of them not too surprising. We've seen Dele Aleke quite prominent recently as a spokesperson for the president. He emerged as special advisor on communication strategy and media. And of course, Mr. Wale Edu, special advisor on monetary policies. Does that mean a role at the CBN or the finance ministry? Time will tell. We also have 2 women, and of course, it would be good to see much more diversity as the fuller list is announced. So obviously, the president has got off to a flying start, and I think perhaps market will interpret this as a good signaling for the investor community to at least show and preserve market confidence going forward. Well, that's it for our business top picks. And of course, we'll be talking about the student loan development with Mukhtar Mohammed in a short while. But let's see what else is happening around the world. First, in Zambia, Zambia's creditors are close to agreeing a long-awaited debt restructuring deal that will allow the International Monetary Fund to disburse $188 million to the distressed African nation. Abebe Emre Selassie, the fund's Africa director, said during a panel at the Bloomberg New Economic Gateway Africa Forum in Marrakesh, Morocco, that the bank has had initial agreements to provide financing assurances to the IMF, which can provide financing to Zambia. And over in Egypt, also struggling and battling inflation, Egypt's annual core inflation rose to 40.3% in May from 38.6% in April. Data from the Central Bank of Egypt showed. Month-on-month, inflation increased to 2.9% in May from 1.7% in April. The Central Bank of Egypt figures come after data from statistics agency CAPMAS showed that Egypt's annual urban consumer inflation rate in May accelerated to 32.7% from 30.6% in April. And of course, we shouldn't forget that many years ago, Egypt actually devalued its exchange rate. So inflation, potentially a challenge for those economies that do that. What else do we have in the news coming up here? Well, ECB policy rates are up 25% basis points, trying to extend its fight against inflation, even as the Eurozone economy literally sputtered on Thursday. The ECB raised borrowing costs to their highest level in 22 years, leaving the door open to further increases. For the 7th time in a row, the ECB raised its benchmark rate, which banks pay to store their cash safely at the central bank, to 3.5%, the highest level since 2001. Well, over in the US Fed has left interest rates unchanged at 5 to 5.25 percentage points. It follows a 2-day meeting that ended with a unanimous policy statement, but in new economic predictions, Fed Chair Jerome Powell signaled that further rate hikes are likely before the end of this year. A judge has granted a request by regulators in the US to temporarily block Microsoft's $69 billion purchase of gaming company Activision Blizzard. The court says the temporary restraining order is necessary to maintain the status quo while the complaint is pending. The US Federal Trade Commission, FTC, says the deal could substantially lessen competition in the sector. A 2-day hearing is now due to take place from June 22 in San Francisco. And great news, well, for some, out of the sports world, English football club Manchester United is negotiating granting exclusivity to the consortium led by Qatar's Sheikh Jassim bin Hamad Al Thani in talks to sell itself for more than $6 billion. While a deal remains uncertain, the development represents a major milestone in the efforts of Sheikh Jassim, the son of Qatar's former prime minister, who is one of the richest men in the Gulf state, to take over the iconic sports brand. And talking about legacy, philanthropist billionaire George Soros confirmed that he's handing control of his $25 billion empire to his son Alex. Soros is 92. He has a net worth of $6.7 billion and is one of the top 400 richest people in the world. In 2017, he shifted $18 billion from his family office to his Open Society Foundations, a group of charities that work in more than 100 countries and which Alex was named chairman of in December.